When doing a carnivore diet, should you do protein-sparing modified fasting, high fat, fasting in general, and is ketosis dangerous long-term? I asked Dr. Anthony Chaffee all of these questions and more, so stay tuned. Welcome back, my friends. My name is Sarah. I am known as Carnivore Yogi. Thank you so much for being here and clicking on today's video. Today, I have part 2 of my interview with Dr. Anthony Chaffee, where we discuss all of those things I mentioned in the intro. Is ketosis dangerous? How about protein-sparing modified fasting? Does someone need to do a high-fat version of a carnivore diet? And so much more. I hope you guys are really going to enjoy this interview. I'm gonna link part 1 down in the information section below for you guys in case you missed part 1. But Dr. Anthony Chaffee, if you didn't know already, is a carnivore neurosurgeon. He is in residency in Perth, Australia. He's also a former professional rugby player. He has been following a meat-based carnivore style diet for over 20 years and has a lot of knowledge and information on nutrition, especially for people who are athletes. So I think he has a lot of wisdom to share. And he also works one-on-one with patients, with clients, which I think is extremely important if you want to really understand how these types of things work, because you actually get to see clients having success or not having success with these different implementations. So I think what he has to say is a lot of value. As with all of my videos, there are timestamps down in the information section if you guys want to navigate around through the different topics that we talk about. Speaking of timestamps, those are made possible by my 2 sponsors who I want to take a moment to thank. The first one is going to be Upgraded Formulas. You can use my code YOGI12 to save on anything over on their website. When you're following a keto, carnivore, or low carb diet, making sure that your mineral status is in balance is very, very important, which is why I personally use Upgraded Formulas. I love their hair tissue mineral analysis, so you can actually check to see your mineral status and then know if you need to supplement or not. There's a lot of unnecessary supplementation going on. And that can also cause issues similar to undersupplementation. So that's why I love that HTMA. With a consultation, you can use my code YOGI12 to save on anything on their website. Second sponsor is going to be Optimal Carnivore. Not a huge fan of eating organ meats, but they definitely have a lot of nutritional value. So I love these Optimal Carnivore organ meat supplements. You can use my code Carnivore Y to save on anything over on Amazon that is Optimal Carnivore. They have an organ meat complex as well as a beef liver supplement. And I thank them both, Optimal Carnivore and Upgraded Formulas, for being today's sponsors. I hope that you guys enjoy this interview with Dr. Chaffee. Leave me a comment below if you do, and I will talk with you guys again soon. Have a great day. Well, I'd love to we talked in the beginning before I turned the camera on, just about this whole idea of just fruits. And, there's this idea floating around that ketosis is somehow dangerous for people to do. And I would love to hear your point of view on that as a doctor, what you think about that and kind of what you've seen with patients as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's something important to understand for everyone, because traditionally, state of ketosis is considered a fasting state, a stressed state where your body is just trying to survive. That's not really the case, I don't think. I've taken biochemistry. I have a degree in molecular and cellular biology, with a minor in chemistry. Like, you have to take biochemistry just to get your prerequisites for medical school. We teach this as this is your fasting state, this is your fed state. But, they say, well, when you eat, it looks like this is what your metabolism looks like. And when you stop eating for about 24 hours, it starts looking like this. But if you eat anything except carbohydrates, it also looks like you're in a fasting metabolism. It's only carbohydrates that push you into the so-called fed state. And in fact, we did not evolve to eat carbohydrates. So you can sort of see, the chinks in the armor already. The only reason I think that we are calling, this a fed state and not a fasting state is because by the time we were able to look at our biochemistry at a molecular level, technologically, everyone was eating carbohydrates. That was a staple diet for a century already, at least, with Dr. Kellogg's and so forth. And that's a psychopath pushing
Oh God.
breakfast cereal and the
Had,
Seventh-day Adventists sort of
I had
push on
Belinda
veganism.
Fetke on the podcast, and we
Yeah.
talked all about that
Oh,
insanity for
good.
a good 90 minutes.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Absolutely
It's
crazy.
totally nuts. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, everyone had already been in this carbohydrate driven state for a long time. And so, that I think is the only reason why we do that, because when you look at a fasting state, the so-called fasting state, but I think that's our primary metabolic state. That's where all of our heavy machinery comes to bear. Now you can mobilize all of your energy. You can mobilize your fat stores. When you're in a carbohydrate driven state, your insulin goes up. This causes a lot of problems. A lot of diseases are attributed to hyperinsulinemia, just in and of itself. Okay. But when insulin is up, it forces energy into cells. Okay. It doesn't allow it to come out of cells. It blocks proteolysis. It blocks lipolysis. So it blocks your body's ability to break down fat and protein in order to make energy. Okay. So now you can only run on the carbohydrates that you're eating. This is why they say you have to eat carbs in order to burn carbs. We've been saying this for 40 years now. Well, they did studies in 1981 with wolves on that same premise, saying like, well, these things don't carbo load before they chase caribou for 10 hours. And so, do they have blood sugar? Do they have glycogen? And they found out, yes, they do. And it's rock solid. It does not change. It is, no matter what they're doing, their blood sugar is this. No matter what they're doing, their liver glycogen is this. And so that is something that should make you think about this. Animals in the wild don't really eat carbohydrates. Even herbivores that eat things that are seemingly carbohydrates, like grass and so forth, eating fiber. Fiber is a carbohydrate, and they break down that fiber, or the bacteria in their guts break it down. No vertebrate animal can actually break down fiber. But people think, okay, this is fiber, and fiber is made out of glucose, therefore they're getting glucose. But that's not actually correct. The bacteria that are breaking these things down are actually eating the carbohydrates, and then they're expelling out short chain fatty acids. And that's what the herbivore absorbs. So in fact, herbivores are also on a high fat ketogenic starvation state diet, because the majority of what they're absorbing are these saturated fats. And so even a gorilla that just eats green leaves gets about 70% of its calories from saturated fat. The cow gets about 80% of its calories from saturated fat. And then it gets proteins as well, because these bacteria die and turn over, and then the body breaks it down and absorbs those as well. So it's actually not really getting, there's a difference between what they put in their mouth and what they actually absorb through their gut. Very different things. But people don't actually look into that, or they don't realize that, or they're not told that. And so a cow is in a state of ketosis and in a starvation state. But of course, it's not a starvation state. They're eating their primary food source, and we're eating our primary food source. So again, all the hard data shows that humans have been carnivores for the last 3 million years. We have stable isotope studies looking at exactly what different animals were eating. If you have an herbivore eating grass or a plant, you'll have you'll be able to see that in these isotopes. And you have something that's eating that animal, it'll have a different constellation of these isotopes. And so you can actually track these up the food chain. And so our ancestors were actually found to have a higher carnivore rating than lions and hyenas and other carnivores alive at the same time in the same area, meaning that we were eating the carnivores as well. So that's what top of the food chain means. It means we are at the very top. Things may eat us, but by and large, we're eating everything else. Apex predators, top of the food chain. This is something that we know, and yet then we tell ourselves that no, actually, a garden salad is the best thing for you.
Right.
Apex predators don't graze. No. I have never seen a shark eat kelp for roughage.
Yeah.
And so, so this is just doesn't pass the smell test. And so the idea that being in a state of ketosis, being in our in the natural metabolic state that we evolved on is bad for us doesn't really make sense. You have to maybe convince yourself that this is our evolved state. But again, look at the Inuits. Anytime you get one of these questions, just think of the Inuits. they don't have plants or carbs or fruit or honey available to them, even if they wanted them. And so if you cannot get everything that you need in the proportion that you need it from eating meat, and that doesn't sustain you, in fact, you can't thrive on that because it's very harsh living up by the North Pole, then you're not going to make it. And if you're deficient in absolutely anything from a high-fat, meat-based diet, you will not make it past one generation. And our ancestors came through multiple ice ages where we ate no plants because there were no plants available. And so if you're even deficient in one nutrient to one degree, you will not make it past one generation. And so if the state of ketosis is harmful to us in long term, again, we would not be able to live generationally throughout the ice ages, and the Inuits would not be able to live generationally by the North Pole. So I think that that's absurd on its face. I don't need a study to tell me that. There are so many people that just get so caught up. Well, where's your study? Well, where's your study? Well, where's the study that shows the Pythagorean theorem works?
Right.
You know, where's the study that shows that parachutes work better than placebo? There are no studies showing that parachutes work. So why would you use a parachute? Well, that there's no evidence basis for that. No, actually there is. There's evidence that exists outside of a randomized controlled trial. You know,
exactly.
The whole just being so fixated on, oh, where's your study? Where's your study? That's not science. That's academia.
And the thing is about the studies, you know, I have seen different doctors just cherry pick studies. And then when you actually go back and look at the study, it's done on like 2 people over 2 days, you know, 2 70-year-old men, you know, it's like the data doesn't apply to the majority of the population. It's done over a 2-day time period. Yet you're standing here, you know, proliferating all this stuff about how this study says this and that. And people don't know how to read between the lines. People aren't going to question you and go back and look at the data of the study, right? And so these people gain all this credibility and people start to get scared. And I feel like this is what's happened with, you know, you have to eat honey, you have to eat fruit and sugar in order to be healthy. And, you know, and unfortunately, I don't know about your experience, but I've seen a lot of people do this and then begin to have the depression. That was a client that I just had a couple of weeks ago, just didn't understand why she was depressed on a carnivore diet. And when we broke down the carnivore diet, she's eating fruits and berries and honey. And I'm like, that's not a carnivore diet. I'm sorry. I think that this could really be contributing to your depression. So I'd love to hear your clinical kind of what you've seen with that with people as well.
Well, I've certainly seen that as well. And a lot of people I've spoken to say, oh, I really wish carnivore diet had worked for me. I've definitely felt a lot better. My autoimmune issues got better, but I couldn't lose weight and I still had these problems and so forth. So I was asking, okay, what exactly were you eating? Because, people, just like, a vegan diet can mean anything. Oreo cookies are vegan, so you can be the Oreo cookie and heroin diet, and that's all vegan, all plant-based, and so, and then people say it's like they equate a carnivore diet to eating a lot more meat. And well, no, that's really more like a ketogenic diet. And some people aren't even ketogenic. They'll have different sweeteners. Artificial sweeteners can still jack your insulin up and can still derail your metabolism and screw you up in that sense. So
cause leptin resistance too. It's all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's another thing with insulin as well, is it blocks leptin. So your brain can't see, that you have adequate fat stores and so forth. And so you end up overeating. So it's a very easy way to overeat is by increasing your insulin, either through sugar, carbohydrates, or even artificial sweeteners. And so generally people are eating something that is not carnivore, and they say, well, yeah, I'm eating this or that. Well, okay, well, I was eating this, but I was also eating some fruit, or I was having some monk fruit sugar and as a sweetener and this, that, and the other. And so I was like, okay, so that's not carnivore, and so people always say, it's like, well, what can I do on carnivore? Well, it's not really working for me, and this, that, and the other. And they're talking about the different kind of meat and how to cook it, or their fat ratio and this, that, and the other. And it's just like, something's not really seeming right. And it's like, okay, are you eating anything? Are you only eating meat and water? And most of them, oh, yeah. But then you tease it out a bit and they're like, okay, they're still using stevia and they're still drinking coffee and putting stevia in their coffee.
Yep.
and doing all these sorts of things. And so it's like, okay, you need to address those things first, because those are likely going to be the cause. But also it's noise, because I don't know how to help you until all those are gone and you still have a problem. If you still have a problem after that, there are things that we can do. But if you're still eating artificial sweeteners, if you're still eating bits of sugar, if you're still having honey, if you're still doing these sorts of things and you're having problems, well, you need to eliminate those things first to make sure that those aren't the cause of your problems. And almost always it is. I have yet to see someone go pure meat and water carnivore and have these problems that don't go away. The only issues that happen then are people getting their fat content right.
Yeah, that's the
They're
one
not
I
getting,
see.
yeah, they're not getting enough fat, or maybe they're getting more fat than they need, and they're having, copious diarrhea and so forth, because the body can't absorb. It's very difficult for your body to absorb fat without bile. And so once you use up all your bile, that fat just goes out. Is what, that saying, is quicker than fat through a goose. That's what that is. And so, you eat a lot more fat than your body can absorb, it will just be excreted. And so that can be quite inconvenient, but it's not dangerous, as you're not sick, and then
Right.
that's generally what I see. But most people that are having problems, they're generally having, and also artificial sweeteners, like sorbitol and so forth, the sugar alcohols, those things cause outrageous diarrhea. And so
Yeah.
like, that's something that, oh, I'm just having these problems and I've changed my fat and I've done all these sorts of things, but they're still having these artificial sweeteners, and they're trying to blame the carnivore diet for it. It's just like, no, it's the sweeteners. So yeah, I definitely see people having issues that they don't necessarily need to, and not realizing that the few things that they've left in their diet are still actually causing such a significant harm. And it's just a matter of teasing out exactly what's going on, exactly what they have, and getting out and just convincing them. I always say that it's the last 5% of going pure carnivore that carries about 95% of the benefits and the results. And I've certainly noticed that with myself and with a lot of patients. That's when your body just really starts kicking into gear. Even if you're eating low carb, well, I'm not eating much carbs. Well, you're eating enough to increase your insulin to block off your body's ability to mobilize your energy stores and your fat stores. It locks down your fat stores. And so, and now you're not eating a lot of carbs, so you can't even run on those carbs, right? So you're eating enough to block your body's ability to make energy, but you're not even giving yourself enough energy to run throughout the day. So you feel like crap, and you have low energy, and you're just tired, and you're lethargic, and you feel miserable. And so that little bit is actually causing more problems than if you were eating a lot of carbohydrates. So it's something that doing that last jump into just trying it pure for 2 weeks, a month, something, just so you can see, okay, no, this is actually how I should feel. Generally people don't go back after that.
Yeah, that's what happened with me. I was like, oh,
Yeah.
I don't want to go back to how I was feeling before this. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think the one thing I wanted to ask you, I know it's late at night for you, and
That's
I
right.
don't want to
Yeah.
keep you on too long, but the big trend right now is protein sparing modified fast. And a lot of people, like when we
Mhm.
talk about the fat protein ratios, me on carnivore, I tried to do something similar to that. And, I'm in my early 40s, so my hormones are a lot more sensitive at this stage of
Mhm.
life. And so eating a really high protein to fat ratio, I ended up completely losing my cycle, starting to have
Yeah.
sleep disturbances, and just not feeling well. And so I'm curious your thoughts on like people really doing this protein sparing modified fast trend with carnivore.
Yeah. I don't recommend fasting at all on a carnivore diet. The only
Mm,
benefits of fasting, because there are studies that show that fasting is beneficial, but that's in the context of a normal diet where people are eating carbohydrates. And the benefit of fasting comes from getting into your primary metabolic state, the so-called fasting state, and B, eliminating a lot of really poisonous things from your diet. And you're basically detoxing, and your body's just able to shed this nonsense out. And then you're in your proper metabolism as well. So you're getting benefits from that. When you're on a carnivore diet, you're eating what you're supposed to be eating. You don't actually get a benefit from not eating. Okay. And so this isn't a shock state to your system because you're eating. This is food. You're not hungry. You're not starving. You need fat's very, very important. I know people have said something is like, people just still think that if you eat fat, you get fat, but you really don't.
And people say, oh, well, my body can just eat its own body fat. If I avoid fat and just eat protein, then my body can just eat its own fat. And I'm like,
well, yeah, but I mean, it's going to do that anyway,
right?
Because your brain sees the leptin. Leptin is primarily released from your adipose tissue, from your fat cells. Yes. And that goes to your brain to tell your brain how much gas you have in the tank. And so when you have a lot of gas in the tank, you don't actually need to add much more. And so when people are losing, excess body fat, they actually find that they don't eat as much and their body naturally stops them. And in fact, there have been, books written by doctors and so forth back in the 1800s, as far back as the 1800s, saying that on losing weight, on how to address obesity and so forth. And they said specifically, don't eat bread, don't eat potatoes, don't eat these starchy foods, keep, and no fruits as well. And, vegetables to, minimum, but you can eat any meat, especially fatty meat, because, the fat keeps you satiated and so forth. Your brain wants that fat. Your body wants that fat. That's your primary nutrient source. And so when you eat that, you actually become satiated and you stop eating. Your body knows what it's doing. If you're not eating carbohydrates, you're not screwing up your insulin and your leptin and all these sorts of things. Your body, you can actually trust your body signals. And so meat and fatty meat just stops tasting good when you have enough of it. And so you naturally stop. So it's natural portion control. Your brain knows how much fat you have. It wants to burn that fat first. If you eat fat, it's not just going to replace that. Oh yeah, well, here it is. Yeah, you can starve yourself. People in Auschwitz got pretty skinny. Yeah, that's true. They weren't very healthy though. And so there's a difference between healthy weight loss and starvation. I do not promote or advocate for starvation. Your body will readjust and your body will preferentially use your excess adipose tissue first. There's a thing called rabbit poisoning where they were just eating rabbits. Rabbits are so lean, they weren't getting enough fat. They were voraciously hungry. They just couldn't get enough. They just had to eat it because their brains and their bodies were craving fat and they weren't getting enough fat. And people die. You can actually die if you have too high of a protein as a percentage of your calories as compared to fat. You can actually die from this. So that's quite concerning. I think people are going to end up hurting themselves. Another way, you said you lost your cycle. Well, there's a very good reason for that. Cholesterol is a precursor to the majority of the hormones in your body, including your sex hormones. It's a precursor to progesterone, it's a precursor to estrogen and testosterone, your mineralocorticoids, your and your glucocorticoids and so forth. So this is a major precursor to the majority of your major hormones in your body and the steroids in your body that your body needs to run properly. And you will be very, very unhealthy without this. And so when you deprive yourself of cholesterol, which is what we've all been doing, for decades now, and we've been having a lot of problems from that, you're going to run into a lot of trouble. And so, you don't need to fast. You just don't need to fast when you're on a carnivore diet or even a ketogenic diet, because you're already in, the fasting metabolism and so forth. And all the benefits from fasting and so forth are because you're in this metabolism and because you're just not eating poison. And so a lot of these studies, when they're trying to mimic fasting, they go for a fasting mimicking diet. There's a lot of studies showing very, very efficacious in treating diabetes. You can even regrow beta islet cells in the pancreas of mice and type 1 diabetic mice. And they can start making insulin again when you put them on a fasting mimicking diet. Or if you have them fasting, obviously fasting is really hard. So you put them on a fasting mimicking diet, they finally have the exact same results. Okay. So, you don't need to actually deprive yourself of nutrition in order to attain the benefits of fasting. You just have to not eat carbohydrates, not eat poison. And so, I generally advise against people fasting if they're on a ketogenic diet or especially a carnivore diet. You just don't need to be. No, like if it's only of benefit if you're eating carbohydrates. That's it, you
Yep.
know. And same with intermittent fasting.
Yep.
You know, that benefits you by waiting out the clock on the insulin, and you
Right.
just don't need it. All these studies that show benefits, and serious benefits of doing intermittent fasting and so forth, you know, like doubles your testosterone, doubles your growth hormone and so forth, just by intermittent fasting in the context of uh, uh, you know, a standard American diet,
Yeah. Glucose
because you're eating
metabolism,
carbohydrates.
right?
That's
Yeah.
it. Yeah. And so if you're not eating that stuff, you don't need to worry about it.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I would certainly not, you know, I certainly would not recommend anybody doing just you know, pure lean protein
Yeah.
and fasting as well. You're going to hurt yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't see people actually, a couple things. I don't see people really having a ton of success when they try to do like all this fasting and do the super high protein. I think because not necessarily the super high protein, there's other reasons, but with the fasting, I think you're still destroying that ability of the leptin to communicate with your brain. And so
Mhm.
what I think ends up happening is that their appetite never regulates. They don't really ever understand satiety. And so maybe they have these fasting windows, but leptin never docks to the hypothalamus and they end up overeating when they do eat. So it's like, it's just
Yeah.
not there. It's not working. That's my I just made a video the other day about that. I'm sure I'm going to get some hate for it, but
Yeah. Well, but you're not wrong, you know, because we see in, like, you know, cases of rabbit poisoning, people, they eat voraciously,
Mhm.
and so they actually eat a lot more
Yep.
than they necessarily need from a calorie perspective, you know.
Yep.
And so they end up eating more and more and more. So they keep eating and eating, just lean meat, lean meat, lean meat. So they eat actually more calories
Mhm.
than they normally would, or they would otherwise. And this is something that we see, you know, fat is satiating. You know, you eat fat and and your body just goes, yep, we're good.
We're good. Yep.
You know, I get, you know, you see in nature animals getting around 70 to 80% of their calories from fat. And so, you know, I tend to try to emulate that. And when I just eat by just going what tastes good, you know, putting butter on a steak and things
Yeah.
like that, it just, you know, tastes delicious. It just tastes amazing. And, you know, if I go sort of overboard, I can kind of just go like, oh yeah, I'm not really wanting that anymore. My body will just tell me to stop. It just doesn't taste good. It's just not enjoyable. And so I just stop. And I find that getting between 70 80% calories from fat, I just feel the best. I
Yep.
look the best. I perform the best. You know, you actually, there was a study that just came out recently that actually showed that cholesterol is actually very important for muscle growth, and is actually an independent growth factor. It's not just protein. You don't just need protein. You actually need cholesterol in order to build muscle. And so if you're depriving yourself of fat and so forth, you're just depriving yourself of very, very vital nutrients. And yeah, you tend to overeat and so forth. But, you know, everyone thinks you eat fat, you get fat. This is again, this nonsensical dogma that's
Mhm.
come about from the falsehoods, from, you know, the lies that said that cholesterol caused heart disease in the first place. And this is where, you know, you are what you eat came from. And you know, if you're going to eat fat, you're going to get fat, whatever. Okay, you eat an apple, you're going to turn into an apple. It's a stupid argument, isn't it?
Right.
And so, you know, this is all just comes from that. And unfortunately, like in medicine, there's so many things that you just repeated and repeated and repeated so many times that everyone knows it. Okay,
Right.
well,
Oh, I
everyone
hate when
knew.
people
Yeah,
say that. Well, everyone knows. You're like,
yeah. Well, it
red
is.
flag.
Yeah, yeah. And it's just like, well, you know, everyone knew that the earth was flat too. How that one works,
Right.
you know.
Right.
So, you know, and there are things that people, you know, hold, you know, in common thought that they can be right, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's right just because the majority of people think that it's right. So you have to look at what the evidence is. Well, there's no evidence for it. You know, in fact, all the evidence leading up to that declaration, what was that, in fact, fat was really good for you. Fat was very satiating. If you wanted to lose weight, you should eat fat, and you should avoid carbohydrates and so forth. And so that's it. I mean, I'm not fat. I'm
No.
just not. I get the
No.
majority of my
Yeah.
calories from fat. And, you know, I don't get a chance to work out that often. I love going to the gym. I love working out. I come from, very serious sports background. And that's something that I just really enjoy doing. I just don't have the time. I've been to the gym twice in the last 3 months, and and all my patients all the time are just like, "Oh, you get to the gym a lot. Oh, you must be working out a lot." I'm like, literally twice in the last 3 months. And they just really
Wow.
can't believe it. And, like on my Instagram and so forth, I have pictures of me sort of, with my, looking athletic, or, just finished workout, or with my shirt off or something like that. Just basically, not because I want to be a douche and, have my shirt off or anything like that. Actually, I'm quite embarrassed by these sorts of things. I don't like doing them, but I'm trying to show the results of being a long-term carnivore. And even in the context of not actually working out that much, and people say, "Oh, you must. What's your workout program? What's your this and that?" It's almost embarrassing to say. I'm like, yeah, in that picture where, people are accusing me of doing steroids to get there, like, I haven't worked out in 2 months, you
Wow.
know. And so it's like my body just maintains that physique because of my diet, and because I have a high fat diet, and my body fat percentage, stays very low naturally. It doesn't change. It doesn't matter what I'm doing. If I'm working out or I'm not working out, my body fat percentage basically stays the same. I'll get more muscular. I'll put on weight, muscle weight. And then when I'm not working out as much, I'm not eating as much, my musculature will go down a bit, but my body fat percentage essentially stays exactly the same. And that's one of very high fat diet. It's just I'm not eating carbohydrates, and that's really what does it. Fat doesn't make you fat. Carbohydrates and sugar make you fat, and we need to sort of, re-remember that, because we've literally written books about this in the 1800s
Mhm.
and onward since then, and yet, no one realizes that. Oh, I mean, people do. I mean, people know. Oh, carbs will do this sort of thing. Atkins has been around for a while. Ketogenic is,
Yeah.
it's been here for a while, but people still have it in their head that, no, fat is bad. Fat makes you
Yeah.
fat. And it's just like, no, we just established that it's carbohydrates that make you fat, that sugar that's the driving factor in heart disease, not fat. And yet people still say, oh yeah, no, I believe that. Oh yeah, no, I agree that, carbohydrates make you fat and sugars, blah, blah, blah. And then they go, oh, I want an egg white omelet with, no oil. And it's just like, Jesus
Oh, I
Christ.
used to eat that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So
so, but
gross.
it's just so ingrained in
Hmm.
our psyche that fat is the enemy, even though we say with our mouth right then, oh yeah, fat was never the problem, but no butter. And I was
Yeah.
like, God damn it, like,
Yeah.
if that's good for you, eat the damn fat. I
Exactly.
had to tell myself that as well. When I
Yeah.
was back doing this, I was just eating meat and so forth, and I was just automatically trimming the fat off. And all of a sudden I
Hmm.
caught myself doing that, going like, why am I doing that? Like, I trust the data, I trust the science. The fat's good for me. Eat the damn fat.
Yeah.
And so I started eating it, and I had to sort of, relearn to like fat, which is a natural thing. But we just get this ingrained in our head that fat's very bad for us. So we associate that taste with poor health, and we go, oh my God, I'm going to be sick. Oh, that was so fatty. That was so rich,
Yeah. Oh gosh. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like I said, that's the mistake I made when I first went carnivore. And I think that's what a lot of people do is they end up trimming off the fat, being afraid of adding butter. And yeah, if you're a woman, you're going to probably see your cycle disappear.
Yeah.
You're probably going to start to have sleep disturbances. That's just going to creep up on you pretty quickly. And so I think that we have to continue to spread the message that if you're going to eat this way, you have to make fat a priority. Um,
Yeah.
I'd love to hear what you think about people who kind of do this in a therapeutic way where they eat 90% of their calories from fat and 10% from protein. Do you think that that protein amount is a
No.
little bit too low, or do you think that that can be helpful for short periods of time? Or what do you think about doing that long term?
Oh, well, if their body's accepting of it,
Yeah.
sure. As I mentioned, it's very difficult for your body to absorb fat without bile, and we have a limited amount of
Hmm.
bile. Now, maybe when you're eating more fat and you become sort of fat adapted, or whatever, or what have you, you may make more bile, but you still have a limited amount, and so you will run out of that. It's not, it doesn't get made very fast. Average person makes about 800 mils of bile in a 24-hour period, and it's just sort of constantly dripping out of your liver. We don't really see, as far as I understand, you're not having that periodic sort of really pushing it out a lot. As far as I understand it, it's just sort of coming out steadily. Some of that will drip into your intestine. Most of it will get stored in your gallbladder, and that will get concentrated. This is where gallstones come from, by the way, is when you're not eating fat. This gets stored in your gallbladder. And what people don't understand is that it actually concentrates in your gallbladder. And in the textbook, the literature, it actually talks about how it's normal for this to concentrate up to 20 times as concentrate. Okay, well, what happens to any hyperconcentrated solution at rest? Forms precipitate, forms crystals. Well, this is what bile sludge is. This is what bile stones are. And so when you're not eating fat, this is actually when you give gallstones a chance to form. We're being told, in the medical community, we are teaching and we are being taught and we are telling our patients that it's actually from eating too much fat, because there's cholesterol in bile. Bile, again, cholesterol is everywhere. Cholesterol is so important for everything. You need it for bile as well. And they say, oh, well, there's cholesterol in bile. And if you eat too much fat, you eat too much cholesterol. We know cholesterol is just super bad for you. And you make these stones that have cholesterol in them. Well, of course they have cholesterol in them, genius. Like, bile's made out of cholesterol.
Right.
Like you're not going to have a crystal form out of different components than the solution that it's being formed in. I mean, that's just dumb. So of course it's going to have cholesterol, but that doesn't mean that excess cholesterol are causing you to form stones. And so we're telling people, eat less fat. And so they do. And, so you get people that are trying to lose weight. And so they stop eating fat. And then all of a sudden they eat fat again after a certain period of time. They get this pain. They go, oh, and then your doctor says, oh, it's because you've been eating too much fat. Long term, this was built up and blah, 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 blah. But in fact, they never had a problem until they stopped eating fat and went on a diet. And I have yet to meet a single person who's had their gallbladder removed or had gallstones that didn't have that exact story. That, they had some excess weight and they just stopped eating fat and they went on a diet, and that's when they got stones. Every single person has told me that. And you see people that get bariatric surgery and so forth, in order to lose weight. A huge portion of these people end up getting gallstones and have to get their gallbladders removed as well. And the thought is, in the medical teaching that, well, something happens when you lose weight rapidly, something happens metabolically to make it easier for you to form stones. Maybe that's true. There's no evidence for that. It's a guess. Again, it's just best guess. That's a lot of medicine, which is shocking. It should shock the hell out of people. It certainly did for me. And this was just the best thing. Oh, yeah, there's probably something, very scientific. And, maybe that's the case. But regardless, if you eat enough fat, as enough fat is in as much fat as you have bile, then you will use all the bile that your body's made that day, and your gallbladder will be constantly empty, and you will not be able to form stones. It doesn't matter if you're even predisposed to forming stones. There will be no bile there to turn into stones ever if you do that. So even if you're predisposed, even if you have some metabolic something that's making it easier for you to form stones, you cannot physically form stones if you're eating enough fat, because there won't physically be any bile in your gallbladder in the first place. And I've actually talked to people who have had gallstones and so forth, and were getting pushed to go do surgery, and they actually went carnivore, started eating more fat, and actually reversed that condition. Which sometimes I think sometimes horses out of the barn, and so if you have these big stones and this is causing blockages, you're going to need surgery. But if you're not quite advanced to that state, it appears, at least again, just anecdotally from people that I've spoken to, because no one's doing studies on this because no one knows about it.
Right.
That they've actually reverse this, and it leads to the sense that they don't have any problems. They've been eating fat, and they're like, well, I was like, well, had you get it confirmed on ultrasound that the stones are gone? They're like, well, why would I haven't been in pain in 3 years. So, I didn't have a problem, so I didn't get a scan, which makes sense. And either way, so whether they have the stones there or not, they're not having symptoms, they're not having problems. So it really doesn't matter. So, when someone's getting 90% of their calories from fat, eventually they're going to run out of that bile. And again, they're just going to have diarrhea basically.
Yeah.
And so, your body's going to cap it. I don't see a problem with people eating just a ton of fat, because their body's going to self-limit it.
Yeah.
Like you can absorb, some fat to a certain extent, but the majority of it will pass out of your system in your feces. And so, and generally your body will ask for more food if it wants it. If it wants more protein, if it wants more lean meat too, that will just start tasting good, and people will
Yeah.
do it. So I think people can find whatever balance works for them, that their body's asking for. Some people I know, their body just wants a bit leaner than my body wants, and if they eat sort of the amount of fat that I am eating, they get very loose stools, and their bodies just aren't happy with that. So that's fine. Maybe some people want more. So I don't have a problem with people going for 90%. I think their body will sort it out for them. It'll be self-limiting, because they'll just end up having they'll just expel it, majority of it. So yeah,
Yeah.
if people want to give it a try, I don't think it's, but I don't think you're gonna you're not gonna sort of force your body to, some people will take like ox bile and things like that. I think that's
Yeah.
probably a bad idea,
You
because now
do.
yeah, I do. Just, well, some people, if they're having problems with it, or maybe they have the gallbladder out and they're not being able to eat like a big meal at a time, sure. There are certain cases for that, but I think that a normal person with a functional gallbladder that's making bile, I don't think you need to do that, because your body is, I think you can always trust your body when you're doing things in a way that is natural, when you're living biologically, this is how our bodies are made. So we're supposed to be eating meat, we're not eating other crap, so we're not deranging things. In that context, you can assume, and it is an assumption, but I think it's a safe assumption, that your body, the amount of bile that your body is making, corresponds with the amount of fat that your body wants. And so
Yeah.
if you're taking in ox bile, then you can actually force the absorption of a lot more fat than your body may want. And I don't know what that would do. You're at least going to get excess calories. If you're in a
Yeah.
state where it's difficult for you to eat a large meal with fat, that could be helpful. Some people that have their gallbladder removed, the bile is just going to be dripping out slowly. And so, I advise them just to separate your meals out throughout the day and just eat a lot of smaller meals with the fat. And so your body should be able to absorb that. Some people actually make what's called a pseudo gallbladder, which they have it outpouching in the common bile duct, and it sort of works as a secondary gallbladder, and they can actually, eat big meals normally anyway. The ones who don't, and if they find it difficult to sort of separate out their meals throughout the day, or maybe they're at like some big dinner and they really want to have a big meal, taking some ox bile in that circumstance, I mean, that just seems a bit more convenient. But I think for other people that don't have that issue, I think that you're just sort of forcing your body to absorb more fat than it may want, and that can run into problems. I don't know exactly what those problems are, because I haven't really, it hasn't really been around very long, and I
Yeah.
haven't seen what the results of that would be. Maybe it's awesome. Maybe it's great, but I would just imagine that if you're forcing your body to absorb more fat than it wants, well, it's going to be more than it wants, and something, less than optimal is going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I have one more question. We've been going for a while. What
Yeah,
is
sure.
the one thing that you're just the most on fire about right now, if you had to choose, as far as health, lifestyle, and just as a doctor?
Well, I think that getting the word out about all the misinformation that's been perpetrated over the decades is very, very important, because people actually do care about their health. And I hear a lot of doctors saying like, oh yeah, just people just don't listen. They don't listen to the advice. And it's like, no, actually the problem is that they did listen, and the advice was just
Yes.
bad. And so people do care about their health, and they do have, I mean, no one is more interested in your health than you are. And so, people really do listen, and they this is why a lot of people are going vegan and plant-based, because people are saying this is the healthiest thing you can do.
Yep.
This is the thing you can do. And so people are listening to this, and unfortunately they're being misled. And so getting the information out about how fat actually isn't bad for you, how cholesterol is actually very, very good for you and very important and vital for you, how sugar is actually quite toxic and harmful. I think those are, the most important things out right now. Quite simply, all of these major medical issues, diabetes and so forth, heart disease, these take up a huge burden of disease all around the world. They also take up a huge amount of the cost. So there's 9% of Americans are diabetic, and those 9% account for 75% of the Medicare costs. That's massive. Okay. Now realize that 40% of Americans are pre-diabetic. So if they don't change what they're doing, the likelihood is they won't, unless something happens like this sort of movement, that in a decade or so, half the population of America could be diabetic or close to. Now, that's not necessarily that, that medical expenses will come up at the exact same time, because the expensive nature of diabetes is that over the course of 20, 30, 40 years, you're on a lot of expensive medications, but you're also having more and more damage to your body, and you're getting amputations, and you're getting surgeries, and you're getting all these sorts of things happening. So that takes time. But this is certainly going to increase the costs of healthcare significantly if we don't reduce this. Also, it was calculated and reported by Dr. Robert Lustig of UCSF that we spend about $2.4 trillion a year on medical expenses on treating the effects of eating sugar, just sugar, not even all the other plants and so forth, just sugar. So we're spending $2.4 trillion a year just treating sugar. And so you remove sugar, just sugar, and all of a sudden you have $2.4 trillion back in the economy, back going out into areas that could actually, benefit people, instead of just holding them together as they're poisoning themselves to death. That I think is the major issue right now with the health of the world and the healthcare system and so forth. Like, that's your healthcare crisis, paying trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars for diseases that simply don't need to exist and wouldn't exist if we didn't eat these things, plants and sugar, basically, And so I think that's very important. The heart disease is, the number one killer in the Western world, and has been for decades now. That doesn't need to exist. It doesn't need to exist. And it really didn't exist in any real numbers, 100 years ago or so. It's a fairly relatively new disease, as discovered and described in literature and so forth. And then certainly in any real numbers, it was really only the last sort of 50, 60 years that the numbers of heart disease started climbing up to a point of being really appreciable. President Eisenhower had a heart attack. That's how it came to national attention. But people, it was headlines like, what is this heart disease, this new heart disease?
Right.
And so, if this was something that was just plaguing humanity.
Now it's like the number one killer of women, isn't it?
Yeah, I believe so.
Above breast cancer, I think, even.
Yeah. And so, this is a major issue. This doesn't need to exist.
Right.
Okay. So we know this is more of an inflammatory process, driven by carbohydrates and sugar, really. Alcohol, cigarettes, and all these different sorts of things play a role as well. It's a broad. I'm actually releasing a podcast today on cholesterol, just talking all about this and all about the data and the science and so forth, and all the misinformation that went along with it. But it's a larger inflammatory process. When you're eating carbohydrates and sugar, they actually physically fuse to cholesterol molecules and knock out a receptor called ApoB100. This is the receptor that, or the marker that your liver uses to say like, okay, I recognize this is cholesterol, and snake it out and process it. Okay. So now this is damaging it. This is what kills diabetics is high blood sugar, because
Yep.
the glucose molecules physically fuse to different molecules called glycation or glycosylation. And so they glycosylate these cholesterol molecules and make it so your liver can't recognize them anymore. And so now they don't really have anywhere to go. Well, your macrophages have scavenger receptors on them, and they can suck these things up. And that's basically the only thing that can recognize these things and grab them and take them in. And so the macrophage has a near unlimited capacity for these things, and they just eat them and eat them and eat them. They grow up in these massive fatty cells. They call them foam cells. And then you get arterial wall damage, and they go in behind there and they start building up this fatty plaque and say, oh, there's cholesterol in there. That's because you have too much cholesterol. Very simplistic. It's a disease process that utilizes cholesterol, but because it's been damaged by carbohydrates and sugar. So you don't eat carbohydrates, you don't eat sugar, you're not going to get this disease process, And so heart disease doesn't need to exist. Just doesn't need to exist. Diabetes, type 2 diabetes, peripheral insulin resistant, it doesn't need to exist. We're reversing this by putting people on a ketogenic diet, on a carnivore diet. We've been using a ketogenic diet to normalize and stabilize even type 1 diabetics since the 1800s, before we had, widespread access to insulin. Okay, this is something that we've known for a very long time, and that we've worked really hard to forget. And so being able to just get back to what medicine was 50 years ago, when we were actually treating these things appropriately and didn't have all the diseases that we have today, because we weren't doing so many stupid things. I think that's my main mission in life really is to sort of get us back there and get rid of these so-called chronic diseases, because they're not diseases, they're just toxicities. It's like ancient Rome, when they had lead pipes, they all had low-grade lead poisoning. And like, oh, well, this is just normal, this is just how you age. And then people from out in the country and so forth, they're like, that is not normal.
Yeah.
You guys are dying. Like, what is happening? And they eventually figured it out. And so right now, these, plants are our lead pipes. We're living in this. We can't see it because we live generationally, and we just say, oh yeah, well, this is just what happens when you get older. So we grow up thinking that, oh, well, that's just going to happen. That's just normal. Well, it's not normal. It's very much not normal. And so once we can figure that out and get that out there and get more and more data and more people just doing this and showing this, and even going against government regulations, because who the hell are the government? These are a bunch of corrupt, power mad psychopaths. Like I don't actually need to take my life advice from them. Some of them are I'm sure are meaning well, but even the ones that do mean well, it may not be right. And so if I'm looking at what's happening with my own eyes, and I'm seeing patient after patient after patient benefit from this, and I'm benefiting from this tremendously, I'm just going to do it regardless of the government recommendations. And so once we can sort of get that movement out there and really have it take hold and take steam and hit critical mass, where this becomes a mainstream idea, I think that's going to significantly improve the state of the world, and be able to just remove these poisons, and then we'll just stop being poisoned, and we'll be able to get to the other side of Roman civilization, where we didn't have lead pipes and we didn't have lead poisoning, and we can actually move on with society and focus our attention on other things. I mean, just think of the trillions of dollars that we spend treating all these diseases and autoimmune diseases that cost thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars a week to treat. And they don't need to exist. They go away if you stop eating plants and sugar. They just go away.
Yeah.
And so, we don't need to spend thousands of dollars on medications that make people very sick and eventually develop cancer for a lot of them. So, I think that that's my main passion at the moment, is just trying to educate people and get the word out there and try to help people as much as I can. It's difficult with my time constraints, but I have a lot of people messaging me and with their questions and trying to help. And I try to help as many people as I can. And I try to do videos like this and on my YouTube channel and podcast, just because I just want to get this information out to people as much as I can so that they can use that information to live the life that they choose. And and most people are really interested in being as healthy as they can. And so if I can get them, the best information that I can, so for them to do that, that would really be, yeah. But that's my hope anyway.
I love it. And I really appreciate everything you're doing. You're putting out so much wonderful content, and you were so willing to come and chat with me and it's those of you watching, for him, it's late at night and you're a busy doctor. It's like 10 in the morning here, but you're 13 hours ahead of me. So it's getting closer to midnight. So I just can't thank you enough for coming and just sharing. And this has just been a really wonderful, valuable conversation. What's the best way people can find you? I'll link all of it below the video and in the audio only podcast as well.
So I'm very active on Instagram, Anthony Chaffee, MD, and I write a lot of posts and sort of blog posts and things like that on my various pictures, basically talking about different aspects of carnivore diet or nutrition or health and so forth. And so I have a lot of different posts on there that I think most people find very helpful. That's the feedback that I'm getting. And also I have a YouTube channel, again, just Anthony Chaffee, MD. And that's where I post a lot of my videos and discussions with people such as yourself, or just things that I think of and just try to address and give a monologue. And I also post that on my podcast, which is on Spotify, and it's coming on the rest of them, just waiting for approval. And that's called the Plant Free MD podcast. And most of my things will go up on YouTube and Spotify.
Well, I'll make sure to link all of that so everyone can go follow you and listen to your content.
That'd be great.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming and chatting with me.
Yeah. Well,